Chapter 40. Good words and bad. Oh. Good morning, Wareham. All right, so studies time. What is up? Now, I know I look foolish for a few reasons. One, my Patriot hat. That's a little floppy because it was left in the wash. And I've got my Patriot scarf and my Patriot tie. And I'm ready for the Super Bowl, but there's a problem. The Patriots aren't in it. I'm still loyal. I'm still keeping my tie on. Don't worry, Patriot tie, we're good. But I realized that the Super Bowl, even though for me right now, it's happening Sunday, but for you, it's already happened. So my whole point of kind of tying in the Patriots, writing the Constitution, and pumping up the Super Bowl is really stupid because it's already happened. So you know who won the Super Bowl, and I don't. And that's annoying. So if you go back to the future, you could win the bet on the Super Bowl. I don't know. I don't know how that works, the time travel thing. Okay, but I'm kind of time traveling right now because I'm here before the Super Bowl, but I'm talking to you after the Super Bowl. Mind blown. All right. Well, speaking of mind blown, we're learning about some good words and bad words in our great U.S. Constitution. It is great, but there were some problems, and we have to iron some of those out. Women aren't being treated fairly. African Americans aren't being treated fairly, and neither are Native Americans, and I'm sure others. So we've got to work this out. So why don't we read Chapter 40, good and words and bad words. I don't hear bad words. No. I heard that. Chapter 40, good words and bad. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Those were Governor Morris's words, and they were just right. Morris sometimes talked for hours, but when he wrote the Constitution, he wrote just enough and no more. That opening paragraph, called the preamble, is worth memorizing. It is one powerful sentence. But when the framers said, "we the people," did they really mean all the people? I'm sorry to have to tell you that most experts say no. They say that the founders didn't mean women who were not allowed to vote. And they didn't mean Native Americans or blacks. Now hear this, because there is more than one side to this question. And you will need to form your own opinion. I don't agree with the experts. I think that when the founders said, "we the people," they meant all the people. I agree with Joy Hakam's summation here. I think they knew darn well what they were doing. And they couldn't do it yet, but they knew, we mean everybody. And eventually we'll get there. I really think they knew they were sneaking that in. Absolutely. But that's just my opinion. Those founders, most of them anyway, were idealistic men. They were thinkers who were ahead of their times. They knew they were writing for future generations. So they wrote the greatest document they could write. But they were also practical men. They had to create a working document that people would approve. And they knew that some of the citizens in the new United States, and even some of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, weren't prepared to do some things that had never been done before. They weren't prepared to accept women as citizens. They weren't prepared to give us property when that property was a slave. They weren't prepared to be fair to Indians in the rivalry over land. So many of the delegates acted as if we the people meant we the grown-up white men who own property. They were compromising. Maybe they had to compromise. Maybe they thought the problems could be solved later. Here is something ironic. Native Americans' treaties with that phrase, we the people. Native Americans usually begin their treaties with that phrase, we the people. Did the men at the Constitutional Convention know that? South Carolina's John Rutledge had been a good friend of Sir William Warragiege Johnson, who, as you know, was now dead. It is said that Rutledge brought a copy of an Iroquois treaty to the Constitutional Convention, but no one knows that for sure. Remember, George Washington insisted that the sessions be secret. Wherever they came from, the words were perfect. This was to become a people's government, even though in the beginning some people were left out. But it was those three small words, we the people, that kept pushing the nation to include all peoples. Now consider this. In a democracy, politicians usually do what the people want. The settlers wanted Indian lands. They would have them. Could a way have been found to share the land and please everyone? Perhaps not, but that doesn't mean a better way couldn't have been found. The framers and most of the people they represented didn't know how to live with the Indians as partners in a new nation. They didn't even offer them citizenship. Later, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution guaranteed citizenship to everyone born in this country. But it was not until 1968 that Native Americans living under tribal law on reservations were guaranteed the full rights of American citizens. The framers did not come up with a fair way to share the land with the Native Americans. Another big mistake was made. The Constitution didn't outlaw slavery. Most of the delegates didn't want slavery. They knew it was wrong. But in the South, especially in South Carolina and Georgia, a way of life depended on slave labor. The citizens of those states would not approve the Constitution if it prohibited slavery. They threatened to stay independent. Some of the other slaveholding states might follow them. Then the North American continent might end up like Europe, with many nations instead of United States. Some of those nations would be free nations, and some would allow slavery. If you were a delegate, what would you do? So that's a big question, and an interesting thing to point out. I get that you could tell South Carolina and Georgia, get out of here then. We don't want slaves. Fine, get it. If they're not with you, do you think they're ending slavery? Not for hundreds of years longer, anyway. By keeping them in the country, maybe you can change their minds. Maybe you can end it. Think about that. If they're out, they're out. They're doing what they want. You're not freeing any slaves that way. So it's an interesting dilemma. Okay, so they wanted to get rid of slavery, most of the states, but the southern states wanted to keep it, especially South Carolina and Georgia. Remember, it's that old adage, if everyone got rid of slavery, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, they all would have freed their slaves. They would have voted yes to that. But not everyone did, and they refused to do it. All right, so let's keep going. The delegates gave in. They did what the Deep South wanted. They agreed to let slavery continue. They even allowed the dreadful slave trade to continue. The slave trade was the business of bringing Africans into the country and selling them as slaves. Virginia's George Mason knew that the South was not ready to eliminate slavery. He thought, as a first step, that the slave trade should be outlawed. He wanted no more people to be enslaved. The delegates compromised on that. The Constitution gave the slave traders another 20 years until 1808, and then that diabolical and disgraceful business was to be stopped. Sometimes it's hard to see things with the eyes of another age. But if you want to understand history, you have to do that. Try it right now. Imagine that you are in Philadelphia in 1787, listening to James Wilson, Pennsylvania's scholarly delegate. Wilson is proud that Pennsylvania no longer allows slavery. He is talking about the Constitution. It gives me great pleasure that so much was done. I consider this as laying the foundation for banishing slavery out of this country. And, though the period is more distant than I could wish, yet it will produce the same kind of gradual change which was pursued in Pennsylvania. So in other words, what he's saying there is he's proud that they got the slave trade to end in 20 years. No more new slaves from Africa would come in. Of course, they found ways around that. They would import slaves from the Americas, like Jamaica or Cuba, and didn't really check that hard if they were from there or not. Unfortunately, sadly, that's true. But at least he's saying, at least we got something done, and eventually the slave trade will end. That's what they thought they were doing. Didn't work out that way, and it needed a whole war to end slavery, which we'll learn about later this year. It turned out that Wilson was wrong. Slavery would not disappear gradually. But in 1787, many wise people thought slavery was dying. Slavery seemed to be becoming unprofitable. Most white people thought slavery would just disappear naturally. They didn't think it worth a fight, but they were wrong. They couldn't know. There would soon be an invention, the cotton gin, that would change farming in the South. It would make slavery profitable again. So they did what was practical and not what was right. Elbridge Gerry, a prosperous merchant from Marblehead, Massachusetts, saw the price the nation would eventually pay for their practicality. In a letter to his wife, he wrote, "I'm exceedingly distressed at the proceedings of the convention, being almost sure they will lay the foundation of a civil war." Gerry had signed the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation. You'll soon see what he did about the Constitution. Understanding history is hard because it is often paradoxical. So, are people and nations. It would be easier but less interesting if people were either all good or all bad, and if the good people never made mistakes. And talking of a paradox, you can't find a better example than South Carolina's John Rutledge. Rutledge wouldn't budge an inch when it came to defending South Carolina's interests. That means he fought to keep slavery. He fought harder than anyone in Philadelphia. But while he was arguing in support of slavery at the convention, he was quietly freeing his own slaves. Rutledge had inherited 60 slaves. He owned only one when he died. His wife freed all her slaves. George Mason and Thomas Jefferson hated slavery and said so, but they owned slaves and kept them. Now that is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Yeah, so a paradox means a puzzling question, kind of an irony in some ways sometimes. So John Rutledge, while he felt he was doing his job because he was voted in by South Carolina people who wanted to keep slavery, so he fought for them. But in his real life, he knew that slavery was wrong and freed them. Meanwhile, Jefferson and George Mason hated slavery, kept voting for it to get rid of it, but they never freed their own slaves. So interesting. All right, so thank you. So I'm glad you know who won the Super Bowl, because I don't. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.